Good morning. My name is Pete Zeronis, and I am super excited today to host our IoT Smart Infrastructure Working Group Thought Leadership 30-minute kick off your St. Patrick's Day webcast. Our guest today is a friend and a colleague and one of the smartest dudes I know, Mr. John Walsh. He is President and Chief Operating Officer at Bedrock Systems, but you may have seen John's name here, there, and everywhere at places like the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. He's a constant collaborator with government and industry, and we're super excited to celebrate you, John, today, and a little bit about Bedrock. For purposes of our audience and those who watch this at a later date, the IoT Smart Infrastructure Working Group is a group within the emerging technology community of interest within the American Council for Technology Industry Advisory Council. That was a mouthful. Needless to say, we are just part of this great family of ACT-IAC, and our colleagues, Don Lovett, Justin Herman, Dan Morgan, Danielle Graham, Mike Burkholz. These are folks that help make it happen, and I'm just honored to be able to lead a discussion with John today. We like to focus on, in this working group, yes, how technology can influence mission effectiveness and efficiency, while at the same time securing or at least addressing the risk associated with technology underpinning our nation's most critical sectors. John is indicative of that as a thought leader, but also his company, and you're going to learn a little bit about him, a little bit about the company and what makes it unique, because it's important, and being a small business with a huge footprint globally in terms of just having impact. It couldn't be more timely. So with that, John, I mentioned a title, I mentioned companies, but folks, if you Google him or you go to his LinkedIn, he's got this really cool bio, and you could see that he's crazy smart, but also if you hear and when you hear him speak, he's truly a storyteller. So John, why don't you share a little bit about you, your passion, and why this domain space is so important to you and your company?
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, Pete, and thank you for inviting me. And it's great to meet everyone on the ACT-IAC. As I was saying, we are new members now, so look forward to hopefully continuing to collaborate. I'm a engineer by education. Went to Purdue University out there in the Midwest, focusing on aeronautical and astronautical engineering and control systems. So control systems in my world started in weapon systems, aircraft, and over my career, I've been fortunate to be involved in some really challenging projects, which required leading edge technologies in order to solve them. And as I kind of grew and matured into more leadership positions, I was fortunate to get engaged with companies that manufactured electronics, control systems, and eventually cybersecurity. I ran one of the companies that was formerly Honeywell Military Encryption Systems, which became Cypress. A lot of Type 1 crypto, key management stuff, and then got involved with being responsible for analog devices, secure technology group and center of excellence, and since have worked in a number of cyber solutions organizations. So background in engineering management and driving company strategy in technical solutions.
Appreciate that. And John, we've talked a lot. I've had the opportunity to work with you at the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies within the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence on Distributed Energy Resources. I know Danielle Graham cares about this as a member of the Federal IoT Working Group. We've seen this maturation, this evolution of, moving to cloud and edge devices and all the anticipation of this environment that is now in a zero trust kind of discussion, right? And we'll talk briefly about that. Folks, if you watch now and later, we're not going to geek out. Save that for next week when John and I are doing something very focused on zero trust. But for context, again, John, the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity came out almost a year ago, May 12th. And sections 1, 2, and 3, which I know you know well, address everything from OT-IT integration, removing barriers to sharing threat information, and modernizing federal information systems, by way of locking down a lot of the risk that is now out there when you expand the threat landscape to connect to devices above and beyond. Can you speak a little bit to your views of that executive order a year now later, and some of the work that you obviously are involved in regarding the critical infrastructure sector, and just tie together that this is a space that, while compliance might be deemed as the focus, it's as much about compliance as it is about moving that needle into securing those devices. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a pretty broad topic. I think that we're we could step back and be somewhat philosophical about the reasons why, but certainly there's been over the years a pivot towards critical infrastructure as the adversary is moving more towards the OT. And that could be a result of the fact that we're doing a better job protecting the IT infrastructure. I'd like to be able to say that, but we're still seeing the majority of the attacks on the OT emanating from the IT direction. I think we thought at one point in time we'd see the opposite, right? But I think the other reason is that adversaries are beginning to recognize that with ransomware and with other types of attacks, they can have great impacts on our national security, our economy, and so on. So I think that it started several years ago when we saw the Ukrainian attack on the power systems. We began to see various threats present in our own architectures, right? Recently in Florida, the Colonial Pipeline. And so I think what's happening is the US government and industry is recognizing that we've got to do something about it. And there's two aspects of it, right? There's the OT side, where we're less mature in terms of understanding or having systems in place and understanding, because of the proprietary nature of the control systems and protocols and such. We don't have as much signature based attack vectors understanding, so that our tools that have traditionally been monitoring and detection as the foundation it's a more challenging environment. We have devices that are highly resource constrained, use different protocols and standards, so it's much more challenging, I think, in that environment today to address it. So I think the 14028 is really saying a couple things. It's saying that we need to understand the IT-OT convergence issue, and we've got to do a better job of protecting our critical infrastructure. And to do that, I believe we're going to have to rely on some new approaches. One of the things that Bedrock does that is unique, stepping back, I kind of indicated the foundation of a lot of what we do in cyber is based on, if we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's based a lot on concepts around monitoring, detection, mitigation, and restoration. And there's one leg of that we call protection. And this approach around protection, from my perspective, is I'd like to take that a little further and say, well, how about prevention? How do we stop these attacks before they execute? One of the things that Bedrock brings to the table, and I think these new emerging technologies that we're seeing in processors like the ARMv8 and x86, are that we can now support virtualization, trusted virtualization at the edge. So what does that mean, Pete? That means that technologies are emerging that can place a trusted virtualization capability right at the silicon to protect or constrain. So we can kind of follow that zero trust model that you kind of indicated, where the folks in zero trust are starting to say, instead of our traditional approach for monitoring and detection, which is kind of like allow all, deny by exception. And deny by exception is flawed because it's based on understanding the signatures, the attacks, a lot of analytics involved. Typically, the attacks are present. To deny all and allow by exception by utilizing a trusted virtualization environment in which we can put applications in virtual machines where we can introspect, see everything, and strip things down to their least functionality. So I think there are emerging capabilities and technologies that the 14028 is asking us to begin to think about. How do we begin to implement these new approaches? And these technologies are available in x86 and ARMv8 platforms. So the other cool thing about virtualization is the composability nature of it, in the sense that we can take existing platforms, protocols, and so on, and compose them in the virtual environment and get to that, if you will, IT/OT convergence, right? Host those on similar platforms and bring it together.
Yeah, so let me kind of distill that.
An awful lot there. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. I put a lot out there.
You put a lot out there.
Yes, and you did a wonderful job tying some connective tissue together. So, what I heard, and for the audience, if I may, translate a bit, John talked about there are things that happen in our world. Ukraine in 2015, folks, the cyber power grid situation. We have a cybersecurity critical infrastructure, that is cybersecurity framework now, that helps companies and organizations develop a risk profile for both cyber and physical systems. Again, term you might want to Google. And then, John, you brought up prevention. And I know you also know that, look, we can't stop the bad guys and gals, but we can also do our best to prevent. And then once they're in, figure out how we can respond quickly. And that speaks to the resilience. Bedrock, talks about delivering a trusted computing base from edge to cloud. I love that line. I think it dovetails nicely with, again, in 14028, the fact that the federal government must advance towards zero trust architecture, accelerate movement to cloud services, and then centralize and streamline access to that data so that we can have those analytics to do what you're referring to, right? Preventing and then responding. Can you speak a little bit, without geeking out too much, because you've got great terminologies like least functionality. But John, I mean, the world's changed.
Yeah.
We in this working group are, and I know Danielle would agree, and our colleagues, that, look, you have to embrace the innovation and the opportunity to transform, but that's threat landscape expansion is bringing in exponentially more risk. How do you address that when it's this, hey, we may be an IT company, but we understand the OT market? What do you say to that?
Well, I think that so first, a little bit about the Bedrock technology is very unique. It's first of a kind in the sense that, like I said, in these new processors, the vision, Ashar Aziz, Bob Tinker, some of the rock stars in the industry had, they were leaders in virtualization and detection. And they realized that there is coming a day when these processors are going to be able to support virtual extensions right at the CPU level, right? So that we can, right above the firmware, essentially establish a virtualization layer. And then I'm going to use a term, formerly methods proven, because once you begin to create that capability at the edge, you also have to make sure that it's not accessible by an adversary, because obviously the things I'm going to talk about that we can do there, an adversary could do if we weren't able to lock it down mathematically. But to answer your question, the IT side, the enterprise side, and the things that we've learned there are directly applicable to the OT side. The question is, what's the techniques and what are the approaches that we can put in place and to accomplish that? And once we have virtualization at the edge, and we're able to start to implement policies around whether it's extend the zero trust policy. So if I look at whether it's least privilege, if I look at identity, trying to establish confidence level, map confidence levels to some sort of permissioning. And then the question becomes on whatever the device is, how do I then, with that information, constrain that device from only performing the functionality that we want it to perform. We don't want an adversary to be able to gain access to it to get the device to do something different, right? And what's kind of neat is once you have an ability in constrained areas where your processing is occurring, we can establish individual virtual machines. Those virtual machines can be composed in such a way so that we can integrate sensors, let's say on one, put applications in that those sensors need to do their analytics, and put policies in place that might constrain certain attack vectors. Escalation of privilege is a great one. Running Windows XT, right? We know it's got all kinds of vulnerabilities. How about we run it on a virtual machine and we put policies in place right there at the operating system where the compute is occurring that basically doesn't allow a vulnerability to execute. That back to that concept of least functionality, right? And so I think that to answer your question, Pete, we have to have a systemic approach to looking at these architectures. And what we're finding is, where are the critical workflows, the gateways? Where are the smart devices? Whether you're out on the microgrid, it's, you talk about the microgrid. I was, with SEPA yesterday talking about interoperability for the DIR. And I think it's like a lot of these things where we thought we were going to be putting an awful lot in the cloud. We're starting to move more intelligence out to the edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's expensive, there's latency, there's lots of reasons we want more distributed architectures, and IoT is enabling that. So we're going to push more intelligence out to the edge. We've got to secure the edge, we've got to secure that perimeter, and we have to have a nice tight enclave from the edge to the server to the cloud, right?
Yeah. So let me interject here. I have actually a question just came into me to ask you about culture and workforce and the Bedrock, but I just want to emphasize, you mentioned critical workflow, interoperability, DIR, folks. When he said DIR, it wasn't like saying duh, I'm joking, but distributed energy resources. John, you truly understand that, and that was the essence of sort of more a statement that there's so many companies now, there's so many tools, there's so many things companies and government agencies have to think about, right? Which is, I will say this as a former federal employee, that you have compliance and requirements that come down through things like Memorandum 2209 dealing with zero trust. We have an executive order that turns into some type of guidance document. DoD has different requirements sometimes in the intel community than civilian, but as a company, and this is our segue, right here it says that the government and industry, I'll just paraphrase, investing in both technology and personnel to match modernization goals. When you hear that, and yes, you can, shed the, hey, we're not just an IT company, but we understand the OT market. Maybe this is the question. Bedrock has won these innovation awards, by the way. And the question was, one, what did you win those for? I see this global infosec at RSA last year, and then the Tech Connect Defense. But how much do you as a company, as a leader, invest in getting the people that are not so laser focused on just, the security, but like when they come into the culture of Bedrock, you've got to understand the expanse of the sectors, the critical sectors. How much of that is part of the culture of Bedrock?
Well, first, it's a big element of it. It ties into your last question in terms of IT/OT, because what's interesting is first and foremost, as I mentioned, the Bedrock team is very selective. We're fortunate to have some of the really most recognized folks in the industry, both from the standpoint of virtualization. The microkernel author, Udo Steinberg, is one of the co-founders of Ashar Aziz, Bob Tinker from Mobile Iron. Our threat intelligence group comes out of FireEye. So we're very selective about the kind of people we bring in. Now, here's what's interesting, and it's been an aha for me. When we have the ability to put the technology down on whether it's an x86 processor or an ARMv8, i.e. OT, IT platforms, What becomes interesting is the architectures are very similar. The applications you're running and the protocols that you might be using are different based on the vertical, but the virtualization profile, the types of policies you're putting in place in terms of the attack vectors become very common. So we're actually beginning to see, once we bring the virtualization to this place in the stack, and I apply MITRE ATT&CK framework and other things like it, there are substantial ability to reuse things because these architectures, okay, am I using 3 virtual machines, 4 or 5? Typically, the attack vectors are very similar. In fact, when you go through the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you got the 80-20 rule working for you. 80% of the attack vectors in some way or another look for escalation of privilege, right? So we're going to put policies right down at the compute location that don't allow you to get access to escalation of privileges, let's say. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but we have people in the organization that are rock stars when it comes to virtualization, detection, mitigation, understanding the IT enterprise stack and the cloud. And we have folks that I've brought on board that are solutions architects and very well recognized in energy, because what we're learning is the basic platform has to be able to support the verticals. So whether it's energy, whether it's DoD and so on, we're putting in place the capabilities to interact with our customers and co-innovate, ideate, and how we're going to use this virtualization capability to solve their problems. But as I've said, one of the big ahas is, hey, if we're doing a control system on avionics, it looks an awful lot structurally from a virtualization and interfacing standpoint as something that's you know, a smart inverter for the distributed energy grid, or a laptop that's running an x86. So we're able to, I think, part of that IT/OT convergence is, how do we use this virtualization to secure, reduce size, weight, and power, because we're able to better utilize these high power processors by putting virtualization in place, but also as a trusted integration socket, right? Because now I can be running on different virtual machines on the same processor, different applications and protocols on the same platform.
Love it. I love it. So in the interest of time, because I want you to get to your parting shot here in a minute, I'm going to, you know, just summarize for me a lot of what you just captured, and which is, look, you're a company that folks go to the Bedrock Systems website, click on industries and see where they are. There's a lot of questions that I've been peppered with a lot. 3 or 4 have come in, like, where are you in government? We can expound on that at a later date, but it's healthcare, folks. It's telecom. It looks like it's obviously energy and utilities and water. So John, I think it'll be great, obviously, next week, and we have a chance to kind of socialize with the DoD and the NIST, some of those use cases. So folks, again, this is a taste of a company, a thought leader, a unique value proposition, and obviously where they're you know, expanding within the federal space. I will say this as my kind of parting shot is, you know, this working group, and again, shout out to John Walsh and those companies that we feature or try to every month, is we know inside the Beltway, it's not easy to make your mark per se in a meeting. We like to socialize that there are companies, highlight that whether you're an integrator in this channel of folks that must collaborate to ultimately get to the government and provide capability to mission need, this is kind of what we're trying to spearhead. And John, obviously Bedrock's doing that, and shout out to you for just your collaborative passion. And you know, there's sometimes you got to catch lightning in a bottle, but clearly your differentiation is unique. So thank you for today. Why don't you go ahead and in your own words, there's no question, your parting shot, what do you want to leave with the audience? And yeah, we like to try to keep it to 45 seconds or so. So you're a little bit on the spot.
All right, real quick. The world's changing. We're bringing and taking advantage of the ability to bring more compute and functionality to the edge. We're seeing substantial increase in processing capability that we're going to be able to take more and more advantage of at the edge. At the same time, we have to be able to secure that edge through an enclave all the way to the cloud. So in order to do that, we're going to need to be able to take advantage of these next generation processors, virtualization at the edge, trusted compute, and a lot of the feature capabilities that Bedrock has identified as addressing a number of big challenges that we need to address as a community as these new capabilities and technologies continue to present themselves.
Well said, eloquent as always. Folks, thank you for tuning in. We will be able to share this out, tell your friends, family, and others. This was a great, quick and dirty, not dirty, but quick and coffee talk kind of thing with John. We are the IoT Smart Infrastructure Working Group again. We meet every week and we try to feature as often as we can folks like John Walsh. So John, thank you again. Thank you to Nancy and the ACT-IAC team. And of course, you see Danielle's note there. We are super excited and we will see you again, John. So thank you.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.